I'm going to be showing you how to make these Palestine watermelon bracelets. It is a combination of a normal pattern as well as an alpha pattern put together. The normal pattern is found on bracelet book pattern number 22543. And it is an intermediate level bracelet. Now, of course, you can omit to do the alpha and just do the watermelon pattern for the whole bracelet. You're going to need your embroidery thread to make this. I'm using the 4 colors. You're also going to need some tape to hold your bracelet down, as well as a pair of scissors, of course, to cut your strings, and also some clear glue just to hold the strings at the back of your alpha. We're going to start off by cutting off our green and white string. You just need 1 strand of each at 150 centimeters. You're also going to need 4 strands of red at 100 centimeters and 3 strands of black at 100 centimeters as well. Once you have all your colors together, I'm just going to tie a knot, leaving about 20 centimeters at the top for it to be my twisted ends. Now I've gone ahead and taped my bracelet down with the short end facing me, and I'm going to do the twisted ends for the top part first. So I'm taking all my red strings to one side and I'm twisting them clockwise, and then I'm twisting all my other strings on the other side clockwise as well. And then I'm going to take these 2 twisted ends and I will twist them together counterclockwise. And this creates this really nice twisted effect that it makes a really good tie for your bracelet. Now that I've twisted all the way down my strings, I'm just going to tie a knot to secure the twisted end together. Now, I like to incorporate some of the twisted end as a part of my knot. I just find that it, holds everything more securely that way as well, and then it doesn't come loose on me, the twisted end. So I'm just making sure it's nice and tight, and then I'm just cleaning up the ends by cutting off the end and just making it all level. Now I've gone ahead and turned my bracelet around and taped it at the top. And we're going to get started with our watermelon now. So my watermelon, I like to start it with a border. So to do the border where the rind starts of the watermelon, you're just going to do forward knots between the green and all the other strings. So I'm taking my green on the right side, and then I have all my other strings on the left side. And I'm just going to do forward knots on top, all of them. Now, if you're not sure what I mean by all the knotting terminology, forward knot, backward knot, you can watch the video referenced here. Now, I'm going to do the same thing, but now I'm going to take out white, and then I'm going to do a forward knot with my green and all my other strings. Now I'm doing the same thing again, but now I'm going to take out a single red string, and then I'm going to do a forward knot between my green and the rest of my strings. Now I'm going to take out a black next. And again, I'm doing a forward knot between my green and the rest of these strings. And I'm going to continue to take out a string at a time and do a forward knot. And for the rest of the strings, I'm just alternating red, black, red, black. So my next one is going to be a red one taken out, and then another forward knot between the remaining strings in green. Now I'm taking out a black, and I'm going to do a forward knot between the green and my remaining strings. Then I'm taking out a red and doing another forward knot between my remaining strings and the green. And then finally, my last knot is going to be on the last red string. So I'm taking out the black, and I'm going to do a forward knot between the green and the red. And at this point, we are done the border. And now we can get started with the rest of our watermelon. Now our next row is just going to be taking that white string at the very edge, and we're just going to do forward knots across all the other remaining strings except for the green. We're going to leave the green out. So we're going to do a total of, how much is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 forward knots across all the strings. Now that I've completed my 7 knots, I have my rind of the watermelon complete, and we're going to start doing the flesh of the watermelon. So it's going to be a very similar step. We're going to take the red that's all the way to the left of my bracelet, and I'm going to do, again, forward knots all the way across, but I'm going to leave out the green and the white. So that's a total of 6 forward knots. Now we're going to start doing the row that incorporates some seeds, and this is where it gets a little bit different. So instead of doing forward knots all the way across, I'm going to take my last leftmost string, which is the black, and I'm actually going to do backward knots on top of it with all my other remaining strings. So starting off with the red that's right next to it, I'm going to do a backward knot on top of that black. And then I'm going to do a backward knot between the next string in line, which is the next black, on top of that black. And then we're going to do another backwards knot. And we're just going to keep continuing with those backward knots all the way down to the last red that we dealt with. So we're not going to include that red. So that's a total of 5 backward knots. And here's our 4th backward knot right here. And finally, our last backward knot between the red and the black. Now for the next row, we're going to be back to doing forward knots. So I'm going to take my leftmost string, which is the red, and I'm going to do forward knots across the 4 other strings. So just a forward knot on the black, and then another 3 afterwards, another 3 forward knots. Now at this point the pattern does get quite repetitive, so we're going to keep alternating between these rows of forward knots and backward knots all the way until we are done the triangle of our watermelon. So our next row now is going to be backward knots, taking that leftmost black string and doing 3 backward knots on top of it with the other strings. So my first backward knot is going to be between the red and the black. And then I'm going to do another backward knot between the black and the black. And finally a backward knot between the last remaining red and the black. Now for our next row, we're going to go back to forward knots. So we just need to do 2 forward knots between my leftmost red and the other 2 strings, the black and the red, following it. And then for our last bit of our triangle, I'm just going to do a backward knot between the red and the black. Now at this point, we're going to be ready to start our second watermelon facing the other way. And it's pretty much the exact same. It's just all your knots are now going to be reversed. So instead of going forward all the way down, now we're going to do backward knots all the way down between our rightmost string, which is green right now. And we're just going to be taking that down all the way to the very end. So that's a total of 8 backward knots. Now that we've completed that row of green, we're going to now do a row of white backward knots all the way across except for the green at the very end. So that's a total of 7 backward knots. Now that we have completed the weight, you probably can see the pattern already. We're going to now go with the rightmost red and do 6 backward knots across all the other strings. Of course, we're leaving out the green and the white, so just 6 backward knots across the remaining strings. And now we're gonna do the row that has some seats incorporated. So again, instead of going backward knots all the way across, now we're gonna take our last right string, which is that black one, and we're gonna do forward knots between the other strings on top of it. So starting off with the red, there is a forward knot on the black. Then we're going with the next black string, doing a forward knot on the black, and then another forward knot between the next red. So it's going to be a total of 5 forward knots. So this is our third knot now between the red and the black, and then we'll do a forward knot between the 2 blacks next, and then finally a forward knot between the red and the black. And now we're going to go back to doing backward knots between the rightmost string, which is our red string, and the remaining strings. So that's going to be 4 backward knots. And now back to doing forward knots on top of the current rightmost string, which is our black string. So we're going to do 3 forward knots with our next 3 strings on top of that black. Starting with the red, is a forward knot, and then another forward knot with the 2 blacks, and then a final forward knot between the last remaining red and the black. Next we'll do 2 backward knots between the rightmost string and our 2 remaining strings. And then we end off our triangle with 1 last knot, which is going to be a forward knot between the red and the black. And then at this point, you can just keep repeating this pattern for your watermelons. Now we're gonna next do our back to the green to do our first facing side again. And it's just gonna be forward knots all the way across with that green, and it's back to repeating the first side that we did. Now I like to repeat my watermelon pattern 4.5 times before I go into my alpha. Now it is up to you how long you want to repeat it, depending on your wrist size and how long you want your bracelet to be. You can also skip the alpha altogether and just do a watermelon bracelet as well. We're gonna get started now with the alpha part of the flag. But if you look at my bracelet, I kind of like to do half a watermelon first before I get started with the flag. Now, of course, you can just start your flag on an angle after you finish a watermelon. It'll just kind of add a zigzag effect to your bracelet if you decide to do it that way. But I do like to kind of do it in this way. That is a little more symmetrical. So doing the half watermelon is pretty simple. We're just going to start again off by doing those forward knots between our green and the rest of the strings, So that's 8 forward knots, and this part we're just going to do normally as is. And then we're also going to do the white part also normally as is, kind of the forward knots between the white and the rest of the strings, except for our white, instead of stopping at the green, we're actually going to stop before we do a knot on that last red, or which is our second last string. So I'm just stopping my white right on the last black string. So instead of doing 7 forward knots, I'm only doing 6. And then we're going to do the same thing with the next string in line. So instead of doing the 6 knots that we're supposed to do, I'm only going to do 5. So I'm going to leave out both the, or sorry, instead of doing the 5, I'm going to do the 4. I'm going to be leaving out doing the white string as well as the black string that's right next to it. And then you can kind of see how we're starting to have kind of a straight line at the end with my last, the 3 knots that I now have near the bottom. So we're going to continue doing that. Next up is going to be our backwards row. So I'm taking my red and I'm doing it backwards on top of the black. And then I'm going to do a backwards on top of the 2 blacks. I'm ending it there. I'm not going to do any more knots there. And then finally, I'm just going to take my leftmost red and I'm going to do a forward knot between that red and the next black in line. And that kind of leaves me at exactly half a watermelon. So now I can have a nice and straight edge to start my alpha bracelet. So for the alpha, you're going to need the same colors that you currently have. So the red, black, white, and green. But you're just going to need short sections of them. 30 centimeters is way more than enough for this part because it's a very nice and small flag. Now, because it is small, you are going to be needing to do quite a few color switches quite often, so it can be a little bit tedious, but it is worth it, in my opinion. So for our alpha, we're going to be splitting up our background strings into 2s, except for the white. The white, I'm going to leave it alone so that I just have one background string for that one. So we're going to have a total of 5 knots in our alpha, since I'm doubling up all my strings except for that white one. And by doubling it up, what that allows us to do is that we don't have a difference in width between our normal and our alpha part. So now you see me taking the red string and I've just kind of put it underneath my first 2 strings that are going to be my background. I'm going to do a backward forward knot on top of that first 2 strings between my red and those other 2. And then I'm going to do a forward knot between my next 2 strings and my red. And I'm going to do another forward knot now between my next 2 strings, my black and red, and my red string. And I'm going to do another forward knot, but this time instead of taking 2 background strings, I'm just going to take the white alone, and I'll do just a forward knot there. And the reason why the white doesn't have a pair is because we have an odd number of strings in the back, so one of them has to be alone. And then for my last knot, I'm going to do a forward backward knot on that last 2 strings. And that finishes our first row of the flag. Now in my second row, I I'm going to introduce the black and the green. As you can see over here, there's one knot of black and one knot of green on each side. So I'm just going to be adding those strings in. And again, you do not need that long of a strand. 30 centimeters is way more than enough for these parts. So I've gone ahead and taped my black and green to the back. And with my first string now in my second row, I'm going to take the black string and I'm going to do the same thing I did with the red, my first knot in the previous row. I'm going to take that black, put it right after the first 2 strings in my bracelet, and I'm going to do now a forward backward knot between the black and the 2 background strings. I'm going to keep the black up top, and I'm going to take that red that I've pushed to the back and sneak it in there right where that black is coming out and do a backward knot on top of the red and the white. Now I'm going to stop halfway through that knot and take the black down, feed it across, kind of like weave it into my knot, and then I'm going to do the second half of the backward knot. So I'm taking the red down and I'm doing my second half. And this kind of allows the strings and the colors to integrate so that you don't see, any gaps in your alpha. So I've taken that black now, I've put it back, I've put it to the back of my bracelet, just put it through that gap and shoved it to the back. So I don't need it right now. I'm going to do 2 more backward knots between my red and my background strings, and remember to double up those background strings. So I'm putting the red and the black together and tying my red string on top of both of them. Now I'm going to switch again to the green. So I have that red up top, feeding the green right in between that gap where that red is coming out. And I'm going to do a backward knot, a backward forward knot between the green and the last 2 strings. Now I'm going to take that red down again halfway through that knot and just shove it to the back of my bracelet. And then I am completing the rest of that backward forward knot between the green and the background strings. Now to start our third row. Now after every row, I kind of like to make sure that it's nice and straight. So you see me kind of pushing the knots so that they're nice and aligned. The third row has 2 green knots, 1 red knot, and then 2 black knots. So we're going to take the green that we have just used, put it back after those 2 strings, and we're going to do a backward forward knot. And then we'll do another forward knot between the next 2 background strings and our green. And at this point, we're going to have to do a color switch. So I'm taking the green, putting it all the way up top, feeding the red through that to that gap, and doing half of a forward knot with our next 2 background strings. Then I'm going to take down my green, put it across that red knot that I just did, and then I'll take down my red and complete that forward knot. And now I'm going to take that green and shove it to the back of my bracelet. And next up, we're going to be switching to the black string. So I'm just going to take the black and feed it in through the gap where my red is coming out. And we'll do a half forward knot on top of the next string, which is our white for me. So here's half of the forward. Then we're gonna bring down the red, put it across the black, and then bring down the black and do the second half. Finally, we're gonna just take that red and put it to the back of our bracelet and finish up that row with a forward backward knot between the black and the last two remaining background strings. At this point, we are done with using the red for our alpha, but we are going to introduce the color white. So again, I'm just making sure it's nice and straight. And now I'm going to be doing the next row, which does require white. So we're going to start off now this row with a forward backward knot between the black and the two rightmost background strings. Then we're going to do a backward knot between the black and the white string. And then after that, we're going to start our color switch. So again, I'm going to leave that black up top, feed the white that I have just introduced right between that gap where the black is sticking out. And then do half of a backward knot between that white and the next two background strings. And then we're going to bring down the black and then bring down the white and do the second half of our backward knot. At this point, I'm going to take that black, shove it to the back of my bracelet. And I do need to do another color switch right now, so I'm going to bring that green in where the white is coming out. And we're going to do two more background knots between the green and my background strings. So we're going to do half a backwards knot. Then bring down the white, put it across the green. And of course, bring down the green and do the second half of the backwards knot. And then at this point, I'm going to take that white and put it at the back of my bracelet. And then we're going to end off the row between the green and the last two remaining background strings with a backward forward knot. And then we're starting our next row, which is the same colors. So two greens, one white, two blacks. Another backward forwards between the green and the two strings that we just used. And then a forward knot with the next two background strings. And then a color switch, so green goes up, white gets reintroduced where that green is going up. We're going to do half of a forward knot. Then we're bringing the green down, putting it across the white, and doing the second half of the knot. Now we're going to shove green to the back of the bracelet and bring in black instead to do our last two black knots. And similarly to how we just did the color switch, we're going to do half of the forward knot between the next string, which is white for us. Once I'm done half that knot, I'm going to bring down white, put it across the black, and then bring down black and do the second half. Shove white to the back of the bracelet. And then finally end off the row with a forward backward knot between the black and the last two strings. Now these 2 rows that we just did, the green, white, and black, I repeat that 7 times. So I'm going to do that 5 more times for my flag. And then our alpha part is pretty much done. Now I'm doing my last knot of my flag, and that completes my alpha part of the bracelet. And now we have to go back to doing our watermelon. So to avoid getting confused, take all of those alpha strings that you just used for making the flag and make sure that you put them up and out of the way so that you don't accidentally use them when wanting to do your watermelon bracelet. So you can see me right now making sure to separate all of those strings out of my way for continuing my watermelon. Now to go back to our watermelon, we want to do the other half that we did not complete. And to do that, I'm going to first start off by taking my 2 red strings that are next to each other on the left side of the bracelet, and I'm just going to do a backward knot between those 2 and another backward knot between the red and the leftmost black. Next up, I'm taking the 2 blacks that are adjacent to each other in the middle of the flag, and I'm going to do a forward knot between those 2. And then I'm doing a forward knot between the red that's right next to the black that we just knotted. And then another forward knot between the 2 blacks. And finally, a last forward knot between the leftmost red and the black. Now I'm going to take my last rightmost remaining red, and the way my bracelet worked out, the white is kind of in the way, but that's okay. You can kind of just move it over to the right, and we're taking that rightmost red and we're going to do backward knots across the remaining strings. So starting off with the red, and then we're going to do another backwards knot between the red and the black, and we're going to continue that all the way down to the last string. Now as I finish this red row, now we're going to go and grab our last 2 remaining strings. We're going to take our green and we're going to do backward knots across all the strings, including the last white remaining string. So that's a total of 8 knots, 8 backward knots with my green. And now we are back to where we started, and you can continue on completing the watermelon bracelet as we saw in the first part of the video. So next is going to be the white all the way across and backwards, but without using the green. Just make sure that all the alpha strings are out of the way so that you don't make a mistake and accidentally grab them. And you can continue doing as many watermelons as you need. So for me, I'm going to be doing 4 more watermelons all the way down. And then I'll be ending my bracelet. So we have come to the very end. And as you can see, my bracelet ends off with this green border again. And so to do that, I'm just going to take my green string and I'm going to do a backward forward knot across the white string. Then I'm going to scoop up the next string, so the red, and I'm going to do a backward forward knot across both of them. And I'm going to continue on with this pattern. So now I'm going to pick up the next string in line and do another backward forward knot on top of both of them. And I'm going to continue that way all the way to the end. Now don't worry if you see gaps of string kind of coming out. As you see in mine, there's like some strings that are not quite getting incorporated, and that's okay because once we reach the end over here, we can just tug on each separate string from the ends, and that will tighten any of those loose strings. Now that I have my border done, pretty much done the bracelet, I'm going to add a knot at the very end. This is optional. You can skip adding this knot because the bracelet is already made up of a bunch of knots, so it's not like it's going to get loose. But I am going to add a knot over here before doing my final twisted ends. And I want to put my knot as close as possible to my actual bracelet. Of course, I'm also tightening my knot by pulling on each string separately to make sure it's nice and tight. And then once I'm done that, I'm just going to do my twisted ends again, just like I did in the beginning. Once I reach the end of my twisted end, I'm going to do a knot at the very end of that. Then I'm going to make sure to cut off the ends. Now this leaves us basically almost done. The last thing we need to deal with is these strings coming out of the back of the alpha. And so what you're going to do with that is you're just going to cut those strings as close as you can as possible to the end without cutting off the actual bracelet and all your hard work. So I just try and take my scissors and cut as close as possible to the end. Once you've cut all the strands at the back, the last remaining step is just to use some clear, not washable glue to glue those ends so that nothing goes fraying on you. The most important ones to glue are the edges, because being near the edge, they're more susceptible to fraying. I like to glue all the ends though, just to be sure that nothing will come loose. And that's basically the end of the tutorial. Now you have your very adorable watermelon Palestine flag bracelet that you can just tie like so. And thank you for watching.